Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this spring webinar program. I am your host, as always, Peter Humphrey. It's great to have you here today, and I am very excited to be kicking off this new installment of, the first installment of a series on domain-driven design given by our good friends at InnoQ in Germany. Michael Plod, who's with us today, has been a frequent Spring One presenter. And the InnoQ folks are really some leaders in the Spring community in terms of some of their thinking. So we've invited them back for this series on domain-driven design, which, as you know, is very important to achieving the benefits of a microservice architecture. So with that, Michael, I was hoping maybe you would just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the series that we've got planned, and then dive into the topics. So,
yes,
yeah, that'd be great.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may reside right now. The first part, basically, of a series on domain-driven design. Peter and I have been bouncing back and forth on the idea of doing a DDD webinar. We actually did one a couple of months ago with a focus on strategic design, and showed off a couple of examples how some of those patterns can be done in Spring Boot. But we saw that there was a huge interest in the topic, and we thought, let's make a bigger thing out of that, and especially let's go into more detail, especially in some parts that I would say aren't technical at all, or let's go into details in some parts we really want best practices, leveraging all the goodness from Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, Spring Data, and so on. So today we're kicking off that webinar series, and I don't want to shock you in the beginning, but today we are not going to talk about technology at all, or I would say a lot. I think in my eyes, domain-driven design is more than just an IT kind of thing. It's more than just a collection of best practices, how to implement certain things, of, I would say, the idea of a bounded context, which is obviously a good idea to look at the business modeling of microservices, for instance. There is also a lot about the way that we interact in projects, about the culture in an organization, and especially in the very interesting intersection between the business or the domain experts, as some of the folks in the DDD community say, and the IT. And we're going to look into that in depth today.
Great.
And
then Michael, did you want to do questions at the end, or
yes,
folks, you can enter your questions into the question panel, and then we will address them at the end. So sorry about that, Michael. Please go ahead.
Yeah, but Peter, in the end, I trust you blindly. You look at the questions, and when you think that one question is really good at a given moment, just interrupt me and raise it.
No problem.
I guess
no
you
problem.
have a good guess on that.
You got it.
Let me first give you an outlook on the webinar series. Today, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview, and especially the values and the culture of domain-driven design. The second part, which will take place in mid-November, 16th to be precise, we will look into the big picture, strategic design. We will take a look at what domains are, what subdomains are, what DDD brings to the plate that goes a little bit further than the typical enterprise architecture look at domains and subdomains. We will learn what a bounded context is and how we can put bounded context into an interaction with each other, looking at context maps. The third part, we will dive into specific bounded context. We will talk about tactical design. What are aggregates? What are entities? What are value objects? What are repositories? I would say this is a very implementation-focused session, the third part. And this is also a session where we are obviously going to look at certain parts of Spring Data. I mean, we all know our Spring Data repositories, and a couple of folks from the Spring Data team are also doing a few DDD talks at conferences, and they always stress out about the aggregate, the importance of the aggregate, and this is exactly where we're going to look into, and obviously I will mention a couple of Spring references in this one. The fourth part is, I would say, about what I like to call it, the new school of domain-driven design. We're going to look at domain events, event storming, event sourcing, where we're persisting the events, and we'll also take a sneak peek into CQRS. This one will take place in January 17th. And the last part will be very Spring Boot, Spring Data, and Spring Cloud focus. So all the stuff that we have learned throughout the last 5 months or 4 months, we're going to put together and implement a microservice or a couple of microservices using the ideas of tactical design, the idea of a bounded context. You were going to leverage on domain events and implement all that stuff together in an application with Spring Boot. Now, just a few words about myself. Peter already introduced me. My name is Michael Plod. I'm a principal consultant for a company called InnoQ, located in Germany. I call myself a conference tourist because I travel around quite a bit, speaking at a couple of conferences. And I would say I have been doing DDD since approximately 2006. And yeah, well, when I say I have been doing DDD, I have mostly been doing this part of DDD, this part of DDD. In my eyes, it's projects that do the whole picture are rare. I've been in a couple of those, and I can give a couple of the organizational learnings from those today. You can also follow me on Twitter, @BitBoss is my link. And just a small hint, with that webinar series, there will be a book going hand in hand with the series. I'm going to write, I'm currently writing a book on DDD, on LeanPub, and this is not I would say, a theoretical look at DDD. It will be a highly practical look on DDD based on a 40-page massive case study on a mortgage loan system. So if you're interested on that, you can follow that as well.
And InnoQ is coming out with a whole linked set of consulting offerings around this as well, correct?
Yeah, true. I didn't want to do too much advertising. We're doing trainings and obviously consulting offerings surrounding Spring, Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, Cloud Foundry, and obviously DDD as well. And software. I think it's really relevant, Michael, because this is the core of how people really get value out of microservices, and the tooling helps, but you have to have these design shops. So I think a lot of people want it, are interested. Yeah. Okay. So now let's step into DDD. DDD is nothing that I have personally invented. By no means. All the credit and all the props go over to Eric Evans and Vaughn Vernon for writing their really awesome books. Especially, I would like to give a small hint. Eric published his book in 2003, and I would say Domain-Driven Design is one of the few books in the IT sector that is still highly relevant after approximately 15 years of coming out on the market, especially the parts in the strategic design section, are now more relevant than ever, because the idea of a bounded context is really a very good fit for looking at your microservices, how you model your microservices. And domain-driven design is not I would say, a fixed or a very limited construct. No, it's evolving really strongly, especially throughout the last years. If you look at Vaughan's excellent books, Implementing Domain-Driven Design, aka the Red Book, which you can see to your right, you find out that there are a couple of new aspects to domain-driven design. And if you look a little bit further behind the standard books by Eric and Vaughan, you will sooner or later find out about a book called Event Storming, which is being published on LeanPub by Alberto Brandolini from Italy, which is basically a very interesting format for moderating workshops. And we will look a little bit at event storming in our domain events on the part 4 of the series. And so this is, I would say, there is a very active community now going on. There's also dedicated conferences on domain-driven design. I mostly have a look on the European market. Obviously, there's a great conference called DDD Europe, or the Kandinsky, a very new conference, which is now taking place, I think, next week in Berlin. So there is a lot of stuff going on in that community, and it's very interesting to follow how these things are going along. But nevertheless, I would say the basic attitude is always, I would say, rather unchanged. If we look at that guy on that slide now, how this person is speaking in meetings, for instance. Hey, if this happens, I want you to send out a letter to a customer. And after the customer has not reacted or not gotten back to us after receiving the letter, we should give her a phone call. And please notify me if she really wants to cancel her subscription to that with us. Now, this is one way of performing this communication. Now, another way of doing that communication is, okay, after we have inserted into our status table a status flag that a letter should be sent out to the customer, we really need to query the status table of the post management system if that letter has been dispatched to the post. And after doing a couple of let's say, not rest of calls to some web service endpoints using the SOAP protocol, we found out that the customer really wants to cancel their subscription. So basically, those two persons are talking about, I would say, exactly the same thing, but obviously in a totally different language. Now, why do I stress that? I would say the reason is language issues are a very constant issue for problems in many IT projects. I would say if you're in an all English speaking project where you speak English in meetings, where you write down English documentation, you write stuff in wikis in English, you write your bug tickets in English, things are still troublesome. But nevertheless, let's take a look at a word called process. I mean, a process can be many, many things. It can have many, many different meanings depending on the stuff that we are currently doing in a project. Now, looking at a, let's say, application for a loan for a real estate where we want to put a mortgage on. Now, obviously, an example from my book. A process could, or a processed application could be an application that has been sent to the bank on paper, and some person in the bank has checked the correctness of that application. For instance, in Germany, there is a concept called child support. For every child that you have, you get a little bit of money from the state in order to support young families, that they have a few bucks to spend on stuff for the education of their child, or for clothes or food or whatever. Now, it would be a little bit strange if a family with 2 children would enter getting 1,000 euros of child support. I mean, the child support in Germany, depending who you ask, is good or is not so good, but it's definitely not 1,000 bucks for a 2-child family. It's lower than that. So obviously somebody from the bank would ask the customer, hey, did you make an error on that, or what is that? Please give me some further information. Now, that after that application has passed the state of the I would say, personal validation, it can be a processed application. But a processed, I would say, a finally processed application can be one application that has gone through a scoring or a credit decision or whatever. So we always have to look at the preciseness of language. And things, in terms of project language, get even more challenging when you have more than one language in your project. So since I'm from Germany, I would say a German IT failure classic is the following situation. We talk in German in our meetings. We write German specifications. We have German bug tickets. And then the developers are sitting at their desk with Google Translate being open and translating all the business terms from the German specification towards English, because retrieve loan application form sounds way better than retrieve Baufinanzierungsantragsformular. And this is an obviously violation in the language. And DDD is taking a very close look at a concept called the ubiquitous language. We will get into the ubiquitous language, I would say, especially on parts 2, 3, and 4 in the webinar series. I will always reference back to this kind of thing. Another thing that we are very often having problems with, and where domain-driven design is trying to find, I would say, wants to find solutions, is on the next slide. So we obviously have a few, in many projects, especially in big organizations, we have a requirements engineering team. Now, the problem is there is a boundary, or there are a couple of boundaries between them, the business, and the IT. Now, one scenario can be that the business is only talking to the requirement engineers. The requirement engineers are translating those requirements to, let's say, some UML sketches, some formal IT specifications, some build up I would say, a formal model based on a, let's say, domain-specific language or something like that. And they are handing it over to the IT again, then to the IT. Now, the problem with this scenario is the fact that things always get lost or jaded when there is a proxy in place. Allow me to give you two, I would say, examples from my, I would say, consulting experience over the years. There is one organization I've been working with, and they had a clear rule that the IT is not allowed to talk directly to the business, because they were afraid that the business would go totally crazy, change their minds every week, and so on and so forth. So the business has only been allowed to talk to the requirement organization. And the same was valid for the IT. Now, the problem that constantly arose in this sort of organization is that the requirement organization started to run their own agenda on a political level. The problem was that obviously projects have been delivered, some deadlines have been met, other deadlines haven't been met. But when I was a developer in that organization, there was a big party at the end of the year for Christmas. German companies love doing Christmas parties where everybody gets together, they have some food, they have a couple of drinks, and everybody celebrates the successes of the year. And I got over to one person from the business, and they told me, yeah, it's nice what you implemented as a solution, but unfortunately, this is nothing that we need. We can't use that software. It doesn't fulfill our needs. And obviously, there is an issue with that happening. I mean, those projects aren't cheap at all. They are really expensive. And another organization I've been working with was a big organization as well, but they said it is very important that there is a very short communication between the business and the IT. And we make sure that a couple of business people are always close to the people of the IT. They are always there for questions. They're always there for uncertainties. And I was once having an issue being a technical lead in that project. They came up with a new idea, for a new feature they wanted to have in their call center. I was like, hey, I'm really not sure if that is going to work out. I mean, one answer could have been, hey, this is none of your business. You're IT, you program the stuff, and you shut up. But they said, no, you have a totally wrong view on that. We suggest that you as a technical lead in that project go ahead and sit 2 days in our call center and see how our people work in the call center. So I went into the call center for 2 days, sat next to a couple of very nice people in the call center, the agents. I had a headset on, and I listened to them interacting with the customers. And after a day, I really got a grip on their, I would say, on their view, on their strategy, and I really understood their vision. And this was a very key experience for me being, let's say, a lead developer that was coaching other developers in that team and writing code as well in order to really have a product vision. And this is exactly what domain-driven design basically wants. It wants a very high degree of communication and interaction between the business and the IT. And I'm not saying that everybody should get rid of their requirement engineering organizations, but I think there needs to be a new, I would say, another look at things. If we, for instance, take a look at what's happening in the IT community right now, one really, really big thing is obviously DevOps. And if you look at the product portfolio from Pivotal, you have Cloud Foundry, for instance, which is a great platform for really doing hands-on DevOps stuff for teams being able to operate, run, install, update the software, having self-services through the marketplace and stuff. And this is something where we say, hey, it's wrong to have a clear separation between the developers and the IT ops people. And I would say the same motivation that we take a product view on things, not a, I would say, a milestone, whatever view on things, that we have teams that are responsible for a given product on the operating, on the development side, we can take the same thing to the next side of the IT development team. We can apply, in my eyes, the same set of ideas towards the business side, and that's where DDD comes into place. I always say that DDD is basically following very similar ideas on the cultural side than DevOps does on the operating side of things. And obviously, ideas like continuous delivery and so on are a really good idea in such a setup. The next sentence is one of my favorite sentences that I hear quite often. Hey, it's nice you're here. We are Agile, we do Scrum. And this is usually a sentence when I hear that, where I'm usually raising my eyebrows in a, I would say, in a small rush of doubt. Because what I see very often is, in terms of adopting Agile principles, that especially in bigger organizations or in older organizations, I'm not looking at your fancy hipster kind of startup sort of thing, but I'm usually looking at organizations that are a little bit older here, that have grown structures that are very stable and very strict to a certain degree. And especially from those organizations, when I hear these things, I always ask them, when was your last sprint that failed? And the standard answer that I quite often get is, oh no, we're not doing failed sprints. We have to go to the big board meeting, and we have to discuss this and that. So we're not doing failed sprints. We just move these things over. And when you take a look at, I would say, the bigger picture, you see that the budget process, the project portfolio planning process, the requirements engineering process, and even the setting of deadlines is all done in a total waterfall kind of manner. I've just been looking at some of the questions. There was one question, if I mean Scrum fall. If you could specify what you mean by Scrum fall, I can answer your question. I just saw that coming up right now. But I think if we look at domain-driven design from a perspective of Agile processes, I wouldn't call domain-driven design to be an Agile process template or anything at all. It is not, and it doesn't want to be that in my eyes. But in my opinion, DDD goes very, very well hand in hand on the cultural side of things, how we do our projects. So I would say DDD shares a lot of similar core principles and core ideas that the Agile community has. It is certain, it certainly is not a thing you would want to do in a very strong, I would say, waterfall kind of thing. I mean, of course, you can say, okay, this is nice, but we're not doing this, we're not doing that. I always say that's like driving a Porsche with a handbrake that is drawn and want to speed this off from a traffic light. And this is not the thing that it wants to be. Now, I got a clarification. Scrumfall equals Scrum plus Waterfall. Daily stand-ups with top-down design and decision-making. Agile are large companies. Yes, that is exactly what I just meant. Now, when we look a little bit, when we take a step back from my, I would say, light rant on a couple of things going wrong in the IT industry, I would say the motivation of DDD is that the strict borders between IT business through proxies sometimes really don't work. I think we have learned that the waterfall model in the combination, especially with those borders, rarely delivers results that really help the business further in a sustainable manner. And especially because of that, I think, and this is something that I always stress out, that domain-driven design is not limited. And you really shouldn't limit the view on it on technical implementation. Yes, technical implementation is very important. And we will get to that in depth, especially in the following parts of the webinar series. We will get very technical. We will discuss many technical details. But it really also has a strong impact on the way you handle your projects and also on the way you organize your team. And if we now take a look at a couple of, I would say, arguments being made in the microservices or the self-contained systems community, we often see similar arguments being made between the DDD community and the microservices community, that it's not just about technology. It's also very strongly about organization. There's a lot of references to Conway's law and so on and so forth. Now, in my eyes, the core attributes on the cultural side are the attitude. I always refer to, I would say, the culture or the way that DDD is being approached is sort of an attitude that, yes, we are aware that a market can change. Yes, we are aware that eventually business people aren't just able to write a thoroughly neat and correct specification up front, and that we accept that of course we do want to make many things right. We want to release good products, and there are other things in the business going on like design thinking and so on. I think all these things go really very well hand in hand with DDD. But sometimes you make false assumptions and you have a product in order not to lose any market shares. The next thing is agile. I think DDD is not an agile framework, but it fits perfectly into agile processes and approaches, and it goes also hand in hand with DevOps or continuous delivery. One thing I really like to ask my participants when I start DDD training at their shop is continuous delivery an important enabler for doing domain-driven design? And this is a question that usually irritates people a bit. What do those things have to do together? We will see that, for instance, a continuous refactoring of things, not just on a technical side, but also on a business side, is something that is very well in the sense of continually refactor when you can run your tests in an automated manner. When you have a test team that's sitting there clicking through your web page, you can't scale that approach. It just doesn't work. So in my eyes, yes, I think that continuous delivery is an enabler for scaling out domain-driven design. The next thing is the business. One of the standard sentences that you obviously hear very often from DDD people or from practitioners or from specialists is that your business domain should be the driver for the design of your software. Do not shove every problem or solve every problem with a book of standard solutions. Yes, for many things, a relational modeling, relational approach, or ACID transactions are a good choice, but they are not a good choice for a couple of other things. Look at track and trace in the logistics sector. When you order some stuff like the new Super Nintendo Mini Classic kind of thing, and you're eagerly awaiting your package to arrive for you to be in Earth's heaven, you want to see, hey, where's my package? Where's my package? And like every step the package is taking is basically an event. A package has been sorted. A package has been put on a truck. A package has reached another delivery center. A package has been sorted again. A package is out for delivery to your home address. Those are all events. Why do you then model that to a relational status table kind of thing when you have a concept like domain events, for instance? So always reflect that. And there are things in DDD, for instance, the idea of the bounded context, that put this idea even further, that we say, okay, we have certain bounded context in a given subdomain, like for instance, mortgage loan, but just look at a physical thing in a very different manner. And it's that there. So this is a way that we can write independent microservices. And I think this is a very good way of going ahead. Now, the last thing is domain-driven design has a very strong focus on the way we speak in our projects. And the language aspect can be a main driver for designing and structuring your bounded context. We will look into that on the next session, part 2 of the webinar series, very, very closely. And we'll have a couple of examples at hand where we can see that certain dialects of a language can be a driver for, I would say, a division of microservices, or not microservices bounded context, or a merging of bounded context. If you, for instance, look at Germany, where I'm located at, we have a couple of really different dialects. We can say in English, tonight I'm going to a bar and drink a beer with my friend. Now that is one sentence. So one version of that would be, heute Abend gehe ich in eine Kneipe und trinke ein Bier mit einem Freund von mir, which is like a standard school German that is eventually spoken in Hanover or something. Now, if I look at like my home turf, which is Bavaria, you would say, heute Abend gehe ich nach Bozen mit meinem Spezi und trinke Bier. So I think especially also the non-German listeners see that there is a fundamental difference in the language. So those dialects are something you can also transfer to your business. Now, in my eyes, the core aspects that you should be aware of when you're dealing with DDD is that the heart of the system should be your domain, and you want those concepts being reflected in the design of the software. And yes, this is a Spring Pivotal webinar series, but it's not about specific technologies. There is no such thing as the DDD framework or the DDD programming language. So you can do a lot of things from DDD with Scala, with Clojure, with Java, with Java EE or EE4J, or with Spring Boot, with Spring Cloud, or whatever. It's not about technology. It's about a business-driven engineering of software. And it's also very strongly about attitude versus fixed project templates. DDD wants to have an attitude. I once heard a quote in a meeting, which is a very nice quote that shows exactly what DDD is not about. I heard the quote, hey, This isn't about making sense. We have our processes, and we must stick to our processes, no matter if it makes sense or not. This is exactly not, and absolutely not, what DDD wants to be. It is about making sense. It's about, yes, there need to be some processes, but we have to adapt the processes when they don't make any sense anymore. So, and that means it's about the project culture and not some default practices that we pull over any kind of problem that walks our way. And obviously, continuous learning is a thing in this area. I will have an interesting continuous learning example for you in the third part of the webinar series, when we look at how we are modeling aggregates and entities and value objects. And I will show you an example of how you can constantly refactor your approach on that based on continuous learning. And obviously, as I said, language is very important. Now, of course, there are some challenges and some pitfalls to this approach. I would say the standard kind of thing that DDD is only practiced in IT teams, and that the business isn't even aware that there is such a thing. Of course, it is not about business people starting to write code. I think we all agree that this would not be the best idea of the world. And it wouldn't also be the best idea for us as developers to specify what, let's say, some risk management rules into a risk management specification. That's not our job. But I think both parties have to get together closer. That means the business should be aware of a couple of IT concepts, especially in the year 2017 and going further. I mean, every business gets more digital and whatever the hype word now is. And I think also it's no harm for developers to read a book on the business domain they are working in. That's one thing. In my eyes, one thing I will very, very eagerly stress in part 3 of the webinar series, and this is especially one thing that I see in a lot of Java teams, is an error-prone and superficial understanding of the internal building blocks like aggregates, entities, value objects, and especially a data-centric domain modeling. And there is a sort of a difficult situation in our beloved Java scene. We have the JPA specification, which knows an entity. And if you look at the specification of an entity, and if you look at the DDD books, you see a sort of, I would say, yeah, write-off somewhere. I mean, it reads very similar, but the JPA entity is not your business entity. And this is something that we will dedicate one installment of the webinar series for the internal building blocks in order to really dig deep into that. The next thing, I guess I've ranted enough about that already, is waterfall domain-driven design. So one person said Scrum fall, eventually domain-driven fall or domain fall or something like that, is also a challenge, and the team integration aspect is also something that is a challenge. Now, if we look how we go further from that, before we go over to the questions, there are a couple of interesting ones already, as far as I see. The next webinar series will be mid-November, November 16th, before Spring 1, on strategic design. And this is where we talk about bounded context, language barriers, domains, subdomains, and all these good things. And part 3 will be about the tactical design, aggregates, entities, after that domain events, and then we'll look at implementing all these things. Now, looking further on that, there is a high mountain that we have to climb, and the outlook is about the bounded context, the tactical design, domain events, and finally Spring Boot as well, and to implement that now. I would be done for now with my introduction to DDD, and Peter, do you have a few questions for me?
Yes. Yeah, a few people commenting on Scrum Fall, but let's see. There's a couple questions. How can we implement our own business domain language into our Scrum user stories? Is there a way you can suggest?
Oh, this is a very brilliant question. My suggestion would be think about best practices for Scrum user stories. One of the best I'm by no means a Scrum expert or a Scrum master or whatever you want to have there, but one best practice stuck with me, and that fits perfectly to the DDD story. Write user stories in a way that you describe those things in scenarios. Now, in the moment you write your user stories scenario-based with acceptance scenarios and user scenarios and eventually some customer journey scenarios, you obviously have a very nice way to distill a ubiquitous language from that. That was a really good question.
Yeah, I agree. One other one is, can we combine microservices and domain-driven design?
Yes, please, is the answer. Now, basically, I think I would say with domain-driven design, you have a couple of I would say tips, patterns, and hints at A, implementing the internals of your microservices, and B, on the interaction between microservices, and C, on the way that you model your microservices from a business perspective. So I will obviously have a lot of microservice references in the second part of our installment of the webinar series, because this is a very important driver for that.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we hear that from our customers and users all the time about, how this is the hard part, in designing. And this is the design part of the microservices that is hard to get right. I think that's why it's so important. We're here dedicating some time to it on this series. So again, thanks for that. A few things. What is a failed sprint, Michael? Could you define that for us?
A failed sprint. Scrum knows the concept of interrupted or failed sprints. That means a sprint where the product owner says, okay, the development team or the Scrum team hasn't met their expectations or a definition of done on a user story. So you mark that sprint as failed, and you have to restart again or anything like that.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. And then I think you answered this one already, but it may be worth repeating. Are we going to have a deeper understanding of implementing DDD in reality, like repositories, ORMs, and persistence? And, I know I was actually quite pleased to hear you say that, a lot of people, you can't just take like the JPA entity and map that to the DDD entity, right? And that you're going to spend some dedicated time on the data part. Could you mention that again or talk about it again for a moment?
The fifth part of the webinar series will be all about implementing DDD in code. So this is going to be a series where there is not going to be a single slide. It's just going to be code. And we will look at all the specifics in that series. Yes, we will do that.
Awesome, thanks. Do you think DDD needs to evolve more to fit microservices? And if so, in what ways?
I think in evolving is always a good thing. I don't like things that stand still. I think currently there is a very good fit between the two things, and I think they absolutely make sense. What I still have to wrap my head around is this, I would say, the serverless world that looks into a ways more fine-grained, I would say, deployment units and cloud functions and stuff like that. And I'm not sure if DDD really fits into that part, but that is also a reason that I wouldn't call myself a serverless or a cloud function sort of specialist. I need to look into that. That's on my bucket list on reading and learning kind of things. But I think there may be, or there will be, some evolvements that may address this part.
Yeah,
or
that's a good point.
I think there is a lot of potential. I think there are many very good ideas, especially in the context map part of strategic design, that show us how to migrate from legacy monoliths to microservices. But I think there can be potentially a couple of ideas and ways and stuff being added on top of that as well.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I agree. I'm curious to see how DDD would map to the serverless as well. You're right. That's a great point. There's a couple more questions, but there was a few that I noticed that I just wanted to address. Yes, folks, this is recorded as always. The slides will be shared, and the recording is available. It will be available today. It's available at the same URL you used to register, which is that content.pivotal.io link. And if you're curious and you can't find it, just go to content.pivotal.io a little bit later today, and you'll see the entry in the content list for the webinar, and that's where the slides and the recording will be posted. So, great. I just wanted to get that out of the way. We will also be sending out invitations for the next webinar series. Michael, could you put up the lists again?
Sure.
We'll be sending out invitations for the next couple of webinars. We've just arrived at some of the dates, so we're still building out some of the registration pages. But yes, if you want to, if you're subscribed to our newsletter, you'll be getting these, or if you've attended a webinar before, you'll be getting these invitations for sure. You can also just keep an eye out at content.pivotal.io or follow Michael or Pivotal on Twitter. So you'll get the invitations for the next webinars in the series that way. Now, we just had one last question at the moment, Michael. Yes, the person prefaced this with the word Scrum fall in parentheses, but he says he has yet to work anywhere where holding developers to account for 15 minutes daily was not desirable from a business standpoint. Getting the non-development team to engage in the rest of the process, like grooming the backlog or estimating or retrospectives, didn't seem to occur. Now, that's his comment about Scrum fall. How do you see DDD fitting into a model like Kanban, which clearly requires clearly separated swim lanes and a lot less upfront planning? Long question.
Yeah,
does that make sense, hopefully?
Yeah. Basically, first of all, I'm no Kanban expert. I'm no HR process coach or whatever. I think both also share a couple of values. But I would be a little bit afraid here with my superficial knowledge of Kanban is the strong task orientation. So we need to get that task done. We need to get that task done. And we have to sort of optimize the throughput. If I just said something wrong, please excuse me. I'm by no means an expert on Kanban. But that's my superficial understanding of it. I think Yeah, what I like is between a well done Scrum is especially the role of the product owner and the all involvement of the business people in the grooming and so on. And I don't think that a different process addresses those hurdles. I don't want to do any big upfront designs, neither in a well-done Scrum kind of thing, but I agree that there needs to be some sort of a product vision. I mean, just going somewhere, I think, doesn't solve many problems or doesn't deliver a lot of things. I think this task focus is a little bit too limited for my taste in terms of BDP, because I really want to dig deep into the business and I want to explore things and so on.
Excellent. Okay. I think we've exhausted the questions for the moment. And if you would take a moment, folks, to just give Michael and us some feedback in your browser tab at the moment. In your user interface, there should be a poll or a feedback from the audience type of link. That would be fantastic if you take the time to do that. And then now's a good time to look at the attachments and links section or tab in your user interface and, pop those open and bookmark them. And, we'd also really like to encourage you to come to Spring One platform. The discounted price tier, I think, will be expiring soon. Hold on 1 second. I'm just double checking the date. I think it's October 21st, but just wanting to double check there. Yeah, so it's going to be in San Francisco, California, and in fact, we'll have Vaughn Vernon keynoting, speaking about reactive systems and domain-driven design. So the discounted price tier ends at October 21st. I was correct. And so that's right here in San Francisco, California, in December 4th through 7th. So we'll have Vaughn Vernon keynoting, and he's one of these sort of seminal authors. Wouldn't you say, Michael? In this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great keynote.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. So he'll be presenting, and obviously we'll have many other presenters. There's over 10 tracks and over 200 talks. So there's going to be quite a lot of cloud, Spring, DevOps, CI/CD, containers, all the kind of modern development topics that microservices, reactive, all the kinds of modern development topics that one could hope for. So please consider this. And, Michael's been a frequent speaker in the past. We're hoping we'll get you back next year, Michael. Sure. Or at least some of your comrades from InnoQ, as they always give great presentations like this one. So just want to take the time. Thank you. We're getting a bunch of votes in for what people would like to hear next. Thanks for that, everyone. Everyone's saying they're eager for the next chapter's great overview. So I think you've whet people's appetite, and we're all interested to see where this goes.
Thank you.
So you're welcome, Michael. Anything you want to say before we wrap it up for the day?
Yeah, well, basically, thanks everybody for the very interesting questions, for sticking out with us, for the nice feedback, and I'm really eager to have you all on November 16th when we dig a little bit deeper.
Yep. All right. See you soon, everyone. Can't wait for the next one. Bye-bye.